Hey guys, welcome back to Social Studies. Today we're going to be talking about Texas and the war with Mexico. And this is going to lead to basically what we know now today as our continental US. So the land that is acquired by the end of this war is basically all of the United States as we know it today. Okay, so let's get started. Um, Before we talk about the war, let's talk a little bit about the country of Mexico in the 1800s. So in 1821, the country of Mexico fought with Spain for its independence. Similar to the way the 13 colonies fought against Great Britain for their independence, Spain was controlling this land, and the people living there didn't want to be controlled by Spain anymore. So they fought against them, they won their independence, and now Mexico became this huge country. And it included the land of California, Texas, New Mexico, and then what currently is Mexico today. Okay, so all of this dark gray area that you see here. The only issue now is that this land up here is pretty far away from their capital city of Mexico City. That's right here in this area. Okay, so if you're living up here, it's kind of hard to listen to laws and be governed by the president or by the different leaders that are in government when they're all the way over here. It was kind of like the 13 colonies, how they were so far away from England and they didn't want to be ruled by them anymore. So, in order to strengthen these borders, okay, and to prevent people from invading Mexico, they were offering land to Americans who would settle in Texas. So remember, at this time in the 1800s, the United States is expanding and settlers are moving more and more west, okay, during this time. So they're moving this way. And Mexico is offering Americans who settle in this area land. And basically, it was pretty cheap land, and they were offering it to Americans who wanted to move into this area. But there was a catch. So, in order to live in Texas, these Americans had to become Mexican citizens. So, they were going to be part of this Mexican country. They also had to become Catholic because that was the religion in Mexico. And they also could not own slaves. So Mexico was not a slave country. And in order to be part of Texas, the Americans who lived here would not be able to own slaves. So let's talk about one important person who gained a lot of land in Texas, and that's Moses Austin. And that name is going to be very influential because Austin is now the name of the capital of Texas. So this person was a land merchant. So what he would do is he would buy land and then he would sell it to other settlers, and he would make a profit out of that. So he received 18,000 acres of land in Texas. And from that land, he would sell some of it to other settlers and gain money from that. By 1835, 25,000 Americans lived in Texas. So more and more people are coming over to Texas. They're settling here and they're making it basically their own kind of community. They also, however, brought with them 2,000 slaves. And remember that slavery was illegal in Mexico. So bringing these slaves over was not part of the deal. They were not allowed to bring slaves, but they were still bringing them in illegally. These 25,000 Americans who lived in Texas didn't really want to be part of Mexico. They didn't have any ties with them. They didn't have any loyalty. And they also refused to become Catholic. They didn't want to change religions, and they complained about Mexican law. They wanted slavery to be legal. So in 1835, the people living in Texas revolted against Mexico's government. They wanted a total separation from Mexico. They didn't want to be part of the Mexican country. They wanted to have separate ties, but they still wanted to live in Texas. So let's talk about what happened in this rebellion. In 1835, Moses Austin's son, Stephen Austin, attacked San Antonio, which was a settlement in Texas. And after fighting for about 6 months, the Mexicans were forced to surrender at this mission named the Alamo. Texas declared independence on March 2nd, 1836. So after the fighting, Mexico kind of retreated, they surrendered, and the people living here in this area declared that they were independent from Mexico. However, Antonio Lopez de Santana, who was the leader of Mexico, crushed the rebellion. He went to San Antonio and he led a group of army, and he stopped the rebellion from going even further, and he recaptured the Alamo. At this fighting, all the American defenders were killed, and Santana sent one of the wives of the dead to go tell the American general, Sam Houston, that the Mexicans had defeated the Americans. So obviously Texas was super upset. They had lost many of their soldiers, so they decided to organize an army. Then that same year, Sam Houston, with his army, surprised the Mexican army and defeated them. And one of the very famous quotes from this battle was when the Americans were marching in to attack, they yelled out, "Remember the Alamo." So it was kind of like revenge for the Americans. So because the Mexican army was defeated, the Texans forced Santana, who was the leader of Mexico, to sign a treaty of independence. So they set the Republic of Texas border at the Rio Grande, and it kind of made Texas its own little country. Later, though, the Mexican Congress is going to reject this treaty, and it's going to be fighting all over again. So those people who were living in Texas, remember that they're their own little community now. They're not part of Mexico, and they're not part of the United States yet. However, the people living in Texas voted to join the United States. They had created their own constitution, and they modeled it after the U.S. Constitution. They made slavery legal. And this is one of the reasons why the United States decided not to annex Texas. And annex is another word for add. So the United States did not want to add Texas to the Union. Some of the reasons is because the president at that time thought that if they added Texas to the United States, it was going to lead to a war with Mexico. The northern states didn't want it to become part of the United States because Texas was a slave state and they were trying to end slavery at this time. So Texas decided to become its own independent country, and they called themselves the Lone Star Republic. And that's kind of why Texas is known for that Lone Star. The Cowboys logo is that star. It's on their state flag, because they were originally their own one lone state country. Okay, so fast forward a few years, and in 1845, the U.S. Congress decided that, okay, yes, let's include Texas into the Union. The president at this time, President Polk, really wanted to go to war with Mexico. One of the reasons is because they disagreed on the border of Texas. So Mexico wanted the border to be further up at the Nueces River, and Texas wanted their border to be at the Rio Grande, which made Texas a lot bigger. So Polk sent one of his army generals, General Taylor, to this land that was in between the two rivers. So that piece of land in between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande River, he sent a group of soldiers into this area. Mexico saw this as a challenge. They kind of said, like, wait, why is an army coming into this land? So they decided to send soldiers to the area too. In 1846, fighting broke out and Polk officially declared war against Mexico. Now, the Mexican American War was originally supposed to be about the Texas border. They were fighting to determine where Texas ended, where the Mexico and Texas border was, so that it wouldn't interfere with either the US or the Mexican country. However, Polk also wanted California because at this time, Mexico was pretty big. So if we look back at this area, all of this was considered California back then. So even though they're fighting over land here in this area, okay, so this is where the Rio Grande is, Polk also wanted to acquire this land. So the motive of the war kind of changed. Yes, they wanted to set a clear border for Texas, but they also wanted to acquire more and more land. And specifically, Polk wanted California because of the cities of San Diego and San Francisco. This would be a very ideal place for trading. And at this time, in 1842, only 7,000 Mexicans lived in California, and they were considered Californios. So it wasn't heavily populated with Mexican people. And more, in 1846, more than 1,000 Americans lived in this area that was considered Mexico. But they didn't have loyalty to Mexico. They were kind of considered Americans. There was a man named John C. Fremont, and he led a rebellion against this area because he wanted California to be its own republic too, so its own separate community. And they called it the Bear Flag Republic. That's why we have a bear on our flag. We have a star on our flag because it was going to be one independent place. But this only lasted about a month because Polk sent U.S. troops and Americans to capture California. So he wanted it to be part of the United States, not its own separate country. In 1847, Americans attacked the capital in Mexico City. And when this happens, it's almost always going to end the war because that country is not going to want to give up their capital. It's kind of like if a country would come to Washington, D.C. and attack us, it's kind of a big threat to that country. So because of this, Mexicans agreed to sign a peace treaty, and that treaty was the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. And what happened here was that the Mexican-American War ended, and it had a lot of consequences. So one thing was that Texas was sold to the United States officially, and it set the border at the Rio Grande. So now it made Texas even bigger, and that was part of the United States. The treaty also sold 32 million acres of land. So all of this land was sold to the United States, and later it would become known as the states of California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming. So all of this land was sold for $15 million. And even in today's standards, but back then, it was not an expensive purchase. All of this land was more than half of the Mexican country. So in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Mexico lost 55% of its territory, which now became part of the United States. Some consequences from the war, some unfortunate events that happened was that 13,000 Americans died in the war. But only 1,700 died from actually fighting in the war. The rest died from diseases. Remember that this land was pretty undiscovered. It was new. It was unexplored. So there was a lot of disease that happened during this time that killed most of the Americans. Another unfortunate event was that 50,000 Mexicans died trying to defend their homeland, and eventually they lost most of their land for their country. Alrighty, so I've also uploaded this worksheet for you guys to complete. What you're going to do here is a word bank of 6 words that you are going to fill in the text. So please make sure that you read through the text, and as you're writing in the terms, they kind of make sense to what you're reading, what it's referencing. And then also on the second page, you have one comprehension question that I want you to answer in 3 complete sentences. So in the lesson you guys did on, what was it? The one that you did on Monday? You guys did well on answering in 2 to 3 sentences, but now I want you to work on complete sentences. So don't give me a really simple sentence, because I know you guys can do better than that. Okay, so please make sure that you're answering in complete thoughts, you're giving me original answers, you're not copying and pasting, okay, because I know you can do it. Alrighty, if you have any questions, please let me know. And Friday, we're going to be talking about how this new land that the United States acquired, California, became part of the United States. And more specifically, we're going to talk about the gold rush and how that is going to attract so many people to California. Alrighty? So we'll talk about that later. Have any questions, please let me know. And I will talk to you later. Bye.